Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Owen, and I'm a marketing manager at Arcserve. I want to thank you so much for joining us today for this joint ransomware webcast with ThreatTrack and Arcserve. Before we jump into the presentation, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping tips. We will be recording this presentation, and we'll send it out to everyone via email after the webcast concludes. Today's agenda. We will be dissecting a ransomware attack and taking a look at some common variants first. Then we'll go into some best practices on how to prevent an attack. We will hear some exciting case studies about end users that have outsmarted their attackers. And then we're going to cover some best practices for recovering without having to pay. We are going to end the session with some Q&A. So please, if you have questions, send them to us throughout the presentation. We'll do our best to get to as many of those as we can at the end. If we're not able to answer your question during the live webcast, we will follow up with you individually afterwards. So our presenters for today, we have Gary Pelzar, who is the Director of Business Development for ThreatTrack. We also have Doug Johnson, Product Manager at ThreatTrack, Christoph Bertrand, who is a VP of Product Marketing for Arcserve, and Gary Sussman, who is a Principal Consultant with Arcserve and will be joining us for the Q&A session. So I want to thank everybody again for joining. We're going to get right into it. Now I will pass it over to Doug.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Let me first introduce ThreatTrack. ThreatTrack grew out of an industry in need of advanced malware and threat detection solutions. The company's history dates to 1994 as Sunbelt Software, and its popular threat analyzer, previously called CW Sandbox, is the industry-leading malware sandbox trusted by governments and Fortune 100 entities. First popularized in 2005, Viper, previously called CounterSpy, is an award-winning endpoint security solution for home and businesses. It protects millions of users worldwide across PCs, mobile devices, servers, and cloud-based services. In 2003, these technologies were acquired by GFI and later spun off as ThreatTrack, a fully independent company focusing on threat and malware discovery. Since then, ThreatTrack has introduced additional solutions for network and email-based threat and malware protection, among other innovations. Now that you have a sense of ThreatTrack's credentials, I'd like to ask Gary to help us unpack the nature of a ransomware attack.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. If you've joined us today, it's likely you've seen the headlines or possibly have been impacted by ransomware directly. It's certainly top of mind with the customers that we talk to. Although ransomware is not new, there's been a dramatic escalation in the frequency and sophistication of attacks over the last few years. The primary goal of ransomware is to anonymously extort money from victims through social engineering and outright intimidation. Some are calling this the Year of Extortion, as the type and number of victims continues to expand and the total value of ransoms paid grows at alarming rates. In 2015, it was estimated that the Cryptowall ransomware generated upwards of $325 million in ransomware payments. Attacks have surged so sharply in 2016 that the FBI says hacking victims in the U.S. have paid more than $209 million in ransom payments in just the first 3 months of the year. This success just drives more ransomware activity. The other factor that has changed is the size of the ransom demands. What started as small ransoms directed at individuals has turned into large ransoms targeting businesses, schools, and public services. One of the highly publicized ransomware attacks occurred recently at Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center in California, where attackers demanded 9,000 bitcoins, which is roughly $5 million at today's rates. The hospital ended up negotiating the ransom and paid $17,000 to get access to their data. So this timeline shows the progression of ransomware over time and includes some of the most successful ransom campaigns over the last few years. The theory of cryptovirology has been around for many years. A paper on the topic was published in 1996 by researchers from Columbia University and the IBM Watson Research Center. In 2013, CryptoLocker first surfaced, attacking individuals and companies in the UK by arriving as an email attachment that appears to be a customer complaint. What made it different was that it introduced encryption of files with commercial-grade encryption, a unique key for each individual infection, and a ransom demand with a 72-hour response window. In early 2014, Cryptowall was prevalent after the CryptoLocker network was shut down under Operation Tovar. It used unbreakable AES encryption, a new unique infection mechanism using compiled HTML, and robust command and control activity over the Tor network. It also introduced the concept of deleting volume shadow copies on the system using the Windows Volume Shadow tool. In 2015, the TeslaCrypt campaign focused on gamers where upon infection the malware searched for 185 or so file extensions related to 40 different games. The files targeted were the game save data, player profiles, custom maps, and game mods stored on the victim's hard drives. In a unique twist, the system was eventually shut down by the developers and the master key was released to the public. In 2016, we've seen many new variants. Petya is a more destructive variant that not only encrypted files, but also made the system completely useless by encrypting the file system's master file table. In effect, the operating system is unable to load. Drydex, Locky, and BART all appear to be related and from the same actor group. Drydex was a very successful banking Trojan delivered as a malicious email with a Word document attached to the message. The malware was designed to steal banking credentials and attempt to generate fraudulent financial transactions. Although that was not specifically ransomware, it led to the creation of Locky. Locky was created by the same actors that were behind the Drydex banking Trojan, matching the scale of that campaign. Locky uses an intermediary malware downloader called RockLoader that is installed via JavaScript file. RockLoader is capable of downloading multiple types of ransomware. And finally, BART. BART uses similar techniques and infrastructure as Locky, but adds the ability to encrypt files locally without access to a command and control network. The files are zipped and password protected instead of encrypted with a public-private key combination. So there are over 170 or so different ransomware variants in the wild that are being tracked. Many are very similar in nature, and many build off of each other. There's actually different newer versions of the same family. But they can be basically broken down into a few major categories. Encryption ransomware, such as CryptoLocker, encrypts personal files and folders and demands a ransom to get your files back. Lock screen ransomware locks the computer screen and demands payment. It often tries to scare the user by stating that the user has done something illegal that has been discovered by authorities such as the FBI. In many ways, lock screen ransomware was a precursor to encryption ransomware. Master boot record, or MBR ransomware, changes the computer's master boot record so that the normal boot process is interrupted. Instead, a ransom demand is displayed on the screen at boot time. Ransomware targeting web servers leverages known vulnerabilities in the content management systems to deploy ransomware on those web servers and encrypt those files. And then lastly, mobile ransomware largely affects Android devices and is a whole other discussion in itself. Infections occur via drive-by downloads or through fake apps loaded outside of the Google Store. So let's talk about ransomware and how it gets into your environment. The two primary entry methods are through email and web browsing. Email is typically delivered as part of a broad spam campaign designed to trick large numbers of users into opening attachments or clicking embedded links that lead to infected sites. It essentially requires the user to fall for the bait, which is actually easier than you think. Users can also be infected by visiting legitimate sites that have been compromised. In some cases, ransomware has been found lurking in advertisements served on popular websites, including the BBC, the New York Times, MSN, and AOL. The simplest and most effective infection is a user that opens an attachment. That immediately executes a payload locally that begins to infect a machine. There's a secondary download using common exploit kits that then download the ransomware, which either encrypts locally or communicates with a command and control network to establish encryption keys that are used for the encryption process. What this flow shows you is that there are multiple points where you can defend against ransomware, which includes an email protection system, active network monitoring and blocking, and of course, endpoint protection. And ultimately, you have to make sure your users are trained in what to avoid, as they are the main entry point for ransomware attacks. So here we'll talk about one of the popular variants from a couple years ago, Cryptowall. You'll notice this one is Cryptowall 4, which is the 4th iteration. So this is an example that we analyzed using our malware sandboxing solution called Threat Analyzer. It was delivered as a phishing email and targeted at executives at a telecom firm. The email contained a zip file with malicious macro code in a Microsoft Office doc file. Since most people have macros turned off, it even contained instructions for the user on how to turn on macros so it would run successfully. When the macro code runs, it drops and runs a new file called comprendre.exe in the Windows temp folder. That new file is a Upatre Trojan variant, which is a pretty nasty piece of malware. It dynamically forks the Windows process service host and makes an HTTP request to pull down the actual Cryptowall 4 malware. It then cleans up after itself and deletes comprendre.exe. The Cryptowall 4 malware then forks to explorer.exe, spawns a new service host, and pulls encryption keys from a set of compromised URLs. At that point, encryption begins, and eventually a message will be displayed to the user that their files have been encrypted. And to add to the misery, it also disables Windows System Restore by altering the Windows registry, and then deletes the system shadow copy using the Windows tool VSSadmin, leaving the user with very few options at recovery unless they have robust backups. And lastly, the BART campaign occurred as recently as June and was targeted worldwide. Within the first hours, there were over 5,000 infections, meaning 5,000 of the people that received the email fell for it. At a ransom of 3 Bitcoins each, the potential value on this campaign is enormous, in the multi-millions of dollars. BART has many similarities to the Locky ransomware. It arrives as a phishing email with a subject line related to photos or images with a zip file attachment named photos.zip. That zip file contains malicious macro code in a JavaScript file. When the JavaScript runs, it checks the default language of the system and will not run if the language is Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian. This was largely targeted at the US. It then downloads and installs the Rockloader malware, which subsequently downloads and executes the BART ransomware. BART changes the desktop background with a file called recover.bmp and also leaves a file called recover.txt as the ransom note with the instructions on how to recover files. It will even present the ransom note in the appropriate language based on the default language of the system. BART is different than others because it does not require command and control infrastructure for encryption as others like Cryptowall did. It creates password-protected zip files locally on your machine of all your files and then deletes the originals to prevent access. The ransom to get a key to unlock your files is 3 Bitcoins, which is roughly $1,750. That's actually significantly higher than previous encryption ransomware, which is in the low hundreds. On a side note, a decryptor tool was created and made available, but requires a copy of an original file to make it work. So one good way to have a good file is to have good backups. So hopefully this gives you some background on the ransomware problem and also some insight into how specific variants work. I think the main message to take away is that ransomware is constantly evolving and improving and is not going away. The lucrative and anonymous nature of the attacks will continue to breed more and more activity. Now I'm going to transition back to Doug, who will focus on best practices for preventing a ransomware attack.
Thank you, Gary. The first best practice for preventing and protecting against ransomware is education. Now, part of this education begins with participants on today's webinar learning about what your organization can do to protect against ransomware, for instance. Congratulations for attending today. But the kind of education here we're talking about really refers to your end users and end user training. So analysts agree that the majority of threats, up to 97%, begin by tricking users into performing ill-advised actions. This includes email phishing attacks, as Gary mentioned earlier. So the first best practice is to systematically and regularly train users. Training topics should include email and password best practices. This should also be tied to your HR and IT policies. Other topics should include mobile and Wi-Fi security. And you may have industry-specific topics that likewise fit into such a training program. This training should be regular and updated with content matching your current security needs and trends. Top organizations automate and audit end-user security training. They hold each individual responsible for completing security courses. They test comprehension and randomly test actual user behavior to ensure standards. This is the first best practice. Your users are the first line of defense to stopping ransomware. A solid endpoint security solution is the second best practice to stop ransomware. Making sure that each computer is protected with multiple layers of defense is key. Consider a typical user. They answer email and browse the web for applications and information. Your endpoint security product should protect against known phishing attacks and actively protect browsers from bad URLs where ransomware can live. Now, your endpoint security product should protect mobile and removable devices such as USB keys from attacks as well. And keeping systems patched, especially often vulnerable software like Flash, is critical. And at the heart of any endpoint security product is that it scans and protects files themselves. Beyond these traditional defenses for endpoint security is behavioral analysis technology. Let's talk about that in just a moment. Now, a solid layered defense strategy is one of the best things you can do to technologically protect against ransomware. As Gary mentioned earlier, attacks don't just happen. They follow a sequence of steps. Layered defenses keep you protected. While each protective layer is important, let's talk more about behavioral analysis technology. Behavioral analysis techniques look at the current behavior of your computer. Are certain files being accessed? Is a particular network pattern successively being followed? And so on. This advanced machine-level real-time pattern matching looks for suspicious activities algorithmically. Now, at ThreatTrack and our Viper product, we call this feature Advanced Active Protection. And it's available in our highest grade product, Viper Endpoint Security for our business customers, and Viper Internet Security Pro for consumers. Our tests show this technology helps protect customers from 3 to 15% greater than without this technology. This is particularly true for ransomware. Now, industry tests prove the value of this layered defensive approach and top-grade behavioral analysis capabilities. Viper's is the only vendor that has consecutively been #1 in the last 2 real-world tests performed by AV Comparatives. And this is such a powerful thing in terms of having real-world protection, because the AV Comparatives tests have some of the detective methods that ransomware looks to exploit. This is the second best practice for protecting against ransomware, ensuring you have world-class endpoint security protection. And for Viper, we recommend our Viper Endpoint Security practice or a product for our business customers. The third best practice for defending against ransomware is having a solid backup and recovery strategy. What do you do if the bad guys were to get in? To help us walk through this best practice, I'd like to introduce our colleagues at Arcserve. Christoph, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Doug. Hello, everybody. I'm Christoph Bertrand. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing at Arcserve, and we'll spend the next few minutes walking you through some of the experiences we've heard from our customers and how backup and recovery software is truly one of the only ways to get back on your feet should you get attacked by a ransomware type of event. So let me tell you real quick about who we are at Arcserve. You may know the name. We've actually been around as a business for many years in the backup and recovery space. Most recently, 2 years ago, it's actually our 2-year anniversary, we've become independent again. So we're a global business. We have won many awards with our technology since our independence, and we're distributed in a number of countries around the world, which gives us a great perspective on the issues associated with data protection, data backup, and of course the tide that we're facing, this tsunami of attacks of ransomware. So just know that, again, this global presence is combined with many, many years of experience. And when it comes to backup and recovery, we've certainly seen it all in our years. Let me walk you through how our architecture, our solution works, and I'll do this so that I can place it in the context of how it helps you recover from a ransomware attack. In a sense, we don't really care how you get attacked, because our job is to get your back on your feet and get your systems back on your feet. So we're really the remediation of the problem. We're agnostic from that standpoint, which is something that really, is a very different or complementary approach to the best practices you've heard before from Doug and the details on the nature of the attacks that Gary described. So first things first. Of course, backup. It's been around forever. You back up locally your data, so all of your endpoints, your workstations, your servers, of course, your critical or mission-critical servers have to be protected. With our solution, you back that up to either an appliance or a server to disk. We call it the RPS, as you can see. It's the recovery point server. So just remember, recovery point, a very important term to remember for the rest of this presentation. And it can send that data off to tape. We do a couple of cool things in the process. We deduplicate the data, which makes it a lot more efficient. And we, of course, have a number of capabilities in terms of security of our own environment. But what's more important is we capture the image, if you will, depending on how you configure your backups and your data protection plans, we capture this image of your data and your systems at a point in time, and we do that on a recurring sort of schedule, right? So this is very important to understand. We are really like this clock that you can turn back. Now, what we also do is we have the ability to leverage an appliance. We have our solutions available as an appliance, and we can combine and replicate data between the various recovery point servers, whether appliances or actual servers that you configure yourself, which means that if you have, say, a number of subsidiaries or satellite offices, you can protect them locally and also take those images, and which is deduplicated, so it's very optimized, and then replicate that to another site. The benefit of doing that is that by definition, by doing that, you've achieved a good level of disaster recovery. And ransomware is nothing else but a disaster. There's no question about it. It is a logical disaster, and that's what the terminology would be here. It corrupts your data, corrupts your systems, and makes them unusable. You can also, and it's not necessarily for everyone, you can also maybe leverage a third party where you have someone take another copy of your backup data and maybe put it on tape, ship it off to a secondary or tertiary location. Maybe it's a service provider. There are multiple permutations. The point I'm making here is that the more you replicate, if you have multiple copies of your backup data, the better, obviously, for your protection. And then we support cloud, of course. You can send data off to your favorite public cloud provider or your files, and you can also leverage, we also have our own cloud offering. So the point I'm making here is that this is a very traditional way of doing backup, but ultimately, who cares about backup, right? It's really going to be about recovery. So let me maybe take you sort of down the path of what that means, because you can be more or less granular depending on the type of data and systems you're dealing with. So first of all, what I'd like to say is our solution is more like a service level agreement dial, and it's very important that you understand that, because essentially you can decide and define how your data gets protected. So there are some systems that you do want to protect daily. The data is, of course, very valuable, but maybe compared to the other layer of systems, maybe more important servers, the type of applications that, well, if they really became unavailable for a longer period of time, more than 24 hours, I'd really be in trouble for my business or for my activities. And then, of course, you can define an even higher level of service. Now, I'm showing 3 levels here of service. You can have as many as you want. You can be extremely granular. On the left-hand side, I'm just simply identifying some of the tasks that you could decide to put in place, including replicating to a distant site, copying data to tape, etc. All of these are options. The point I'm making is the solution can be used like a service level agreement dial, a way for you to create recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives that fit the requirement of your applications and therefore your business. That is important, very critical actually, in the context of ransomware. So RPO, recovery point objectives, and recovery time objectives, I'm going to explain here very simply. If you're not familiar with the term, and of course we always love acronym in the IT business, recovery point objective simply says this is how much data I've lost potentially, or this is how far behind my data is when something happened. So my recovery point objective is really about how much data I can afford to lose for a specific or specified application or system. Okay? Recovery point objective. Now, in a perfect world, you'd want a recovery point objective of 0, 0 being good, meaning you never lose data. It's very, very hard to achieve, but it is achievable, or very close to that level is very achievable. It certainly is with our solution. The question is, for you, do you really have the ability to do it today with your environment? And is it really desirable for every application? The answer is no, but for critical applications, getting close to a recovery point objective of 0, meaning again, your data is as current as can be when something goes wrong. Typically, ransomware is, as I said, a disaster and will essentially interrupt the ability for your systems or your data to be used for business purposes or other purposes, and therefore RPO close to 0 for critical systems is very likely what you're looking for. In the industry, we see all sorts of ranges. True high availability is close to 0. A lot of organizations and companies are very comfortable with 15 minutes, and then it varies based on the type of systems. The other dimension is recovery time objective. So this is how quickly do you get back on your feet, okay? So when ransomware hits, 2 things will happen to you, okay? And I'll go through some details. And some of you already know, because I know you're on this call because it's happened, and it's unfortunate, but it will keep happening to others as well, and it's a problem we can really help you with. Recovery time objective is, now that my systems have become unavailable, how quickly can I actually get my production back, or my department back online, or my store back online? All of these questions are important. Recovery point objective is really how much data I've lost, and therefore potentially how much data do I have to recreate. That's a cost. Recovery time objective is how quickly do I get back in business. Now, we have a lot of technologies that allow you to really mitigate both dimensions. Just know that they are trade-offs, and when ransomware hits, especially if it spreads viciously and typically quickly, you will have to really deal with both dimensions, and it can get very confusing unless you have put in place the right type of recovery plans. So rather than go into a complex feature function conversation, I'd like to just share with you how some people have done it, some of our customers, and it's just a couple of examples. I have an agreement with our customers that we will not mention their name or their specific location. We'll highlight some of the high levels in terms of what business or activity they're in, but obviously we want to maintain their privacy here. But just know that these are absolutely real examples and customers that have been able to get out of dodge with our solution. So the example of a publishing business, as I said, somewhere in the world, essentially what happened to this customer, first of all, they have a number of users, hundreds of users actually. It's a publishing business. So clearly, as you can imagine, there are lots of documents, lots of files, many hundreds of thousands of files, and as well as the traditional business dimension associated, in their case, the point of sale type of systems. So it's a very interesting use case, because what happened, and that's really something you heard from Gary and from Doug. Well, although they had educated their users, they ended up with a click-happy end user. Somebody clicked on an attachment. I think it was pictures.zip or photos.zip. It was the BART type of attack. And so very traditional attack, which, of course, worked, unfortunately, really well. It did spread to many files, and this, I think it was 800,000 files. The reason why that happened, and the reason why it spread so quickly is, remember, in many environments, such as what you may have in your own environments, you use shares, right? You may have some network-attached storage systems. You may give your end users a folder that's on the share, and once that file or that virus gets in, it's going to spread, and it's going to spread to every user. So you can imagine the domino effect that it creates. So here's the thing. I talked about backup, but really what it's about is recovery. With our solution, you can recover files at a specific point in time, a specific version. You can recover folders. You can recover the whole system. You can do a bare metal recovery, which means recovering everything soup to nuts, including recovering, say, that critical server to dissimilar hardware. So should you get infected, and you've seen all of the variants that we're dealing with, should that system be infected, you could literally treat it as gone and recreate it from scratch with our solution. And you could recreate it from scratch at a point in time that corresponds to where you feel the level of attack was managed or was not already in the system. So it's going back in time. In other words, at 5 o'clock, I started losing files because they were infected on that system. I'm going to go back to my last backup. Maybe it was 4:45. That snapshot is good. I was not infected then. I'm going to recover to that new system. Now, you would not want to do this until or unless you've stopped the virus from spreading first, as you can imagine. Otherwise, you're going to keep reinfecting the same systems. But that's really what you can do. So in this case, the customer was essentially doing a snapshot at 7 a.m. The attack, I think, happened at 9 a.m., if I'm not mistaken, or 8:45, something like that. And essentially, the fact that there were multiple snapshots and the ability to get back to 15, 20 minutes in time was very, very helpful because it really paid off. So using our solution, not only did our customer recover the affected systems on their data, and because it was not necessarily a very highly transactional environment, there was not a lot of there was not any data loss, or if there was, it was very mitigated. Essentially, people were not able to work, is really what happened. So it's not like there was no cost. Yes, there was a cost, for sure. But there was not data loss in this case. So it took him 28 hours to not only understand what happened, where did it come from, repair, reverse the damage, etc. So the recovery point objective, by the time it was, or the recovery point, not necessarily the objective, but the actual, was 28 hours. Now you think, wow, 28 hours for somebody who had essentially lost no data, that's a lot of time. Well, that's what happens, especially when 800,000 files are infected, a couple of NAS devices, and many, many users. The good news is that no ransom was paid, number one, and number two, he got a nice letter from the CEO. So it's a great thing when that happens in IT. Another example, again, is somewhere else. We will keep this, the details here private, but it's a medical type of healthcare type of environment. As you know, they're primary targets. You've heard the news. You've even seen the clippings earlier in what Gary was presenting. So essentially, this customer was hit actually with multiple waves, multiple attacks, and unfortunately something that in this industry, this medical industry, was certainly not a surprise. Happened to many others around the geography in question. So essentially, the problem you run into here is that this type of industry, the medical healthcare and industry, is such that it's one thing if you can't sell a book, for example. It's another when you have a patient and when you have to have access to those medical files, or you're dealing with critical information to treat a patient in maybe a critical situation. So really, literally, you really have no choice, or very little choice. Your ability or your propensity to have time to deal with it is very, very diminished. So what that meant is that essentially, typically in those environments, unless you could really solve it very, very quickly, you pretty much had to pay up, making this target very desirable for ransom attacks. So as you can imagine, you don't want much when that happens. Unfortunately, some organizations have had to do that. They've had no choice. It's not a good day when that happens. It's definitely not a good day for the PR person. It's not a good day for the CEO or the directors of that business. And of course, it creates a huge, huge trust issue, as you can imagine. So the good news is that in this customer's case, despite the fact that you had to deal with a pretty vicious attack, which was the fifth in this case, and what it did, it really took over a local admin account and started spreading on workstations and then servers. Essentially, the customer was able to use our solution and get back again to a point in time before the attack, after he essentially stopped the spread of it. So luckily, and really that's the important part is understanding what happened, where it started, understanding the behavior of the systems, as you heard earlier, is very important. That helped him really get to the point where he could figure out how to stop it and move forward and recover the files. He recovered, he saved a lot of money, and we're talking thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to his business. And mostly the attack focused on documents that you'd find in your Office suite, the PDFs and docs and Excels of the world. But more importantly, he was able to get back on his feet very quickly and by definition essentially thwarted the attack. So this was another great example of how it worked. So my best practices for you, you've heard again from Doug earlier. First of all, protect the source machine, goes without saying. Great solution that Doug and Gary described. Just don't hesitate. That's the best investment. The ransomware may still get through. The end users may still be poorly behaved, or who knows, they may also be disgruntled employees who actually are doing this on purpose. There are so many unfortunate occurrences of that. So, okay, if ransomware goes through, something goes through, unfortunately, well, the good news is that you can actually get back on your feet with a good and solid and strong backup and recovery policy. Again, it's not about backups, it's about recovery, and it's about understanding your service levels and how quickly you need to get back on your feet and how much data you can afford to lose on depending on the criticality of the system. So, I mean, the strategy, again, on that is to say, number one, I want to make sure I keep online backups. I want to keep offline backups. And I want to make sure I have copies off-site. Those are very simple rules, but if you do that, you're very, very likely to be in a position to recover. If you do not do that, you could be at risk and actually have to pay up, or even worse, actually lose the data. So, finally, as I said, I think the solution you choose ultimately, of course, I'd like for you to take a look at our great solution, but in general terms, really take a very close look at whether the solution you have today or what you're looking at acquiring meets those requirements, protects your physicals and virtual machines, has the right type of support, has the right type of flexibility for recovery points and recovery times. Ultimately, that is the best way to be flexible in your recovery. Now, I'm going to wrap up with a couple more recommendations. There's a lot of discussion in our industry around ransomware, in the industry of backup and recovery, and it's important to protect the protector, right? So protect the backup server, make sure that it's the data that hosts the backup is not accessible to anybody who's not authorized, have the strongest possible administration security around it, leverage, make sure you have a solution that supports that. It can prevent someone from doing something to your backup server if they want to. As I said, the disgruntled employee situation may happen. If you have copies off-site, and by replicating off-site, you can literally recover from that location or recover the whole backup server itself. So protecting the protector is really the best way of doing this. And, think about it this way. You can leverage lots of tools these days. Apologize here. Lots of tools these days such as this-to-this backup, backup to tape. Tape is still around and still a very useful type of medium. And if you have it in your environment, great way to keep leveraging that investment you've already made. And then also, in our case, we also recommend that customers who feel that they might be at risk cut a copy of their backup repository to either portable NAS devices, another device, and for the smaller backup sets, you can even use USB disks. So there are many things you can do, but remember that ultimately, as much as you want to be economical in your storage consumption, it's important to have a sound strategy that protects the source and protects the protector. So that's what I had. At this point, I'm going to turn it back to you, Mary, and I believe we have 15 minutes or so for questions.
Thank you, Christophe. Thank you to all the guys. You've covered a lot of really interesting information and we have tons of questions from the audience, so I'm going to do my best to get through as many of these as I can. Let's start off for one for ThreatTrack. Let's see. What is the most common way for ransomware to enter the environment?
I'll take that one, Mary. This is Gary. Yeah, this is Gary. I'll take that. The most common way is still email. So primarily through attachments that people are opening, or in other cases by clicking on a link that leads them to an infected file. But email primarily is the vast majority of the infections or the entry points coming into an organization, and that's why Doug kind of covered that whole education part up front as part of multi layers of solutions. Is you really have to train your users to at least be suspicious anytime they get an email with a file that they either don't know who it's from, or even if it's coming from somebody they think they know. They really have to be overly suspicious about things that they're going to open and essentially execute on their endpoint.
Thank you. Here we have one for the Arcserve guys. So Christoph or Gary, the customer that had the BART attack, did they lose any data?
Yeah, I think
no, they did not.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Gary. I was going to say no, they didn't.
So that was easy. That's a quick answer. Let's see. Gary Pelzar, why is ransomware so difficult to stop?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really, there's a lot of techniques that are used with ransomware that are not necessarily new and have been around for a while. And I think really it's about the focus of the actors on the other end. I mean, ransomware has become so productive financially for them that there's a lot of resources being put into continue to develop new ways to either social engineer people or then exploit endpoints. In the past, these actors would try to get malware installed on your system to extract personal data, credit card information, et cetera, that they could eventually try to sell on the black market. But that tended to be kind of pennies on the dollar for them, whereas ransomware, they get an immediate effect. And so a lot of the actors that potentially were even focused in other areas are gravitating to ransomware because it's so financially advantageous for them. And it's interesting, there was a recent earnings call for FireEye, which is a leader in the advanced threat space, and in their earnings report, which was a little below what was expected, they mentioned that they've seen a major drop-off in the kind of sophisticated targeted attacks that they were previously dealing with compared to all the ransomware activity. So it's difficult to stop because there's some very smart people on the other end developing this stuff, and it's really the standard cat and mouse game that's existed for years of trying to keep up with all the advancements, so you can be protected from it.
Got it. That makes sense. Doug, this user wants to know, can you just block malicious websites so the ransomware payload doesn't get through?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. With that, certainly there are multiple ways that ransomware gets in, and certainly Viper, and we spent a lot of engineering time and analyst time looking out for the malicious websites that we already block in our system. But that's just one layer of defense that we really try to focus on, because one of the, of course, techniques that the bad actors will use is they will randomly scramble the URLs that the malware is coming from, and the ransomware in this case. So certainly blocking sites is one technique, and it's one of many. But if we happen to kind of pick one of those random areas that hasn't made a blacklist, and it actually gets to the environment, you need to have that next layer of protection that's in the environment. And that's where things like our advanced active protection that we were talking about earlier could come into play. And of course, ultimately, as Gary was noting, the best defense is that there was never an action taken by a user, for instance, if it was an email. So I would say it's one of many things, as kind of we were saying earlier, that you want to do. And the answer is yes, you want to do that, but there's also other things that go along with it.
Yep, that makes total sense. Let's see. The next one I have here, let's send it to Gary Sussman. How often do I need to back up to protect my data from ransomware? And I guess this is probably personal, it depends on your company, right?
Correct. That depends on the business and the maximum time for data loss. As was mentioned, the RPO, the recovery point protection. Arcserve provides flexibility. We can recover, at the file level. We can provide application granular recovery if needed. So it really depends on the environment, but it's all in the Arcserve solution.
Cool. Gary Pelzar, let's see. Barring protection and disaster recovery, should a ransom be paid if it's the only option remaining? Good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, I've seen different recommendations either to pay or not pay the ransom. I think in general, the industry, the security industry, and law enforcement, FBI recommends not to pay the ransom, and the basis for that is really the same as even ransoms for kidnappings, right? The thought is that paying the ransom just motivates the actors to do it again. So that's the general advice that's given, is not to pay the ransom. But ultimately, it's a business decision, and it's based on the impact to the business, right? So the hospital that I talked about in California, they chose to pay the ransom because of the severity of the impact to their business. They were not able to function as a hospital and deliver care to their patients because of the impact to their computing infrastructure. So they determined that it was worth the money to get back online and serving their customers. So it's a tough one. It really kind of depends. So, and that's why it's so important to, have these multiple layers and really focus on education and have good backup so that hopefully it doesn't come to that, right? That hopefully, you'll have the ability to either prevent or recover without having to pay these ransoms. Because the other thing is in some cases, these ransoms, if you pay them, it's still not guaranteeing you're going to get your data back. You're
yeah,
supplying.
We've seen some questions about that too. Like, how often, does it happen that you pay the ransom and you don't get your money back?
Yeah, I don't have any statistics, to really speak directly to that, but that is definitely a risk. And there's actually one of the malware variants, I forget which one specifically, but in the ransom demand, they actually give you the ability to submit and get one of your files unlocked to basically prove that they're going to unlock your files. So even some of the actors on the other side are trying to convince you that yes, they are going to unlock your files if you just pay them the money. But again, it's a complete wild card.
Well, hopefully it doesn't come to that with everyone who's watching. Hopefully we're able to prevent or recover on our own.
Right.
So let's see. Here's a question for Arcserve. Gary, should I copy data off-site? Does it give me better protection against attacks? Gary Sussman, what do you think?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I would say definitely. You should always avoid a single point of failure if all possible. Obviously, if you have the resource, most definitely should always have an off-site copy. Arcserve provides a built-in replication with our UDP products, so we can replicate the data to off-site locations, cloud. We also have, as mentioned earlier, the copy recovery point feature. So just in case the primary storage gets infected, we have the capability to schedule a copy done to another resource. So you should always have it offline in some cases.
Good. Okay. Doug, how effective is Viper at stopping ransomware? We'll just get straight to the point here, I guess.
Well, that's a very direct question, and let me give a direct answer. It's very good at what it does, and how it's good is really because it has all these layers. And I'll kind of tell an anecdote. I mean, certainly part of it is the test results that we can see and the investments we've been making and building out these layers that we were talking about earlier. But I challenged the team a couple of months back to kind of give me some statistics on all these investments and what are we doing. So in some real world tests that we put together, we ran 100 pieces of pure ransomware, really bad stuff in our lab environments, and threw it at Viper, all at once, essentially in a very structured test. And the great news is Viper stopped 100 out of the 100 pieces of ransomware. And so that was a great testament. And the other thing I would note that as part of that, though, is part of that story is that 3 out of the 100, so not all of them, but just 3 out of the 100 got through by traditional means, but our advanced active protection blocked the ransomware. And so it's kind of a testament to that layered approach that you want to have all the way through, including that advanced active protection that, again, is available in our highest tier product of endpoint security.
Well, that's pretty impressive. Let's see. Gary Sussman. This user has many virtual machines. I have both VMware and Hyper-V, and want to know, does your solution work for these?
Most definitely. Arcserve provides flexibility within these hypervisors. We can protect them either agent or agentlessly. We can restore these recovery points to the original or alternative host if needed. Finally, we can use these hypervisors for P2V migrations and also create virtual standbys on these hypervisors from these recovery points that are protecting your investment. So a lot of flexibility, not only for physical, but also virtual as well.
Very good. All right, we are coming up here on the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A and get to our conclusion here. If we didn't get to your question live, we will then follow up with you one-on-one after the event, so you can keep an eye out for that. I want to thank you again to all the speakers, Doug, Gary, Christoph, and Gary, for this great presentation, and to everybody who attended today. We really appreciate you spending this hour with us. For more information on either of our companies, you can visit us on our website, so it's www.viperantivirus.com or www.arcserve.com, and you can find lots of useful resources out there. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.